The funny thing was, having tried for 10 years to kind of break into the art world, as soon as I did a project which wasn't at all for the art world, which was totally about talking to the subject matter of my photographs, then people in the art world went, oh, that's interesting. And so it kind of led the way for me to make these projects where I really tried to think about the relationship between the audience and the artwork. Like, who is really going to benefit from me taking photographs? Is it the New York Times? No. Is it a gallery? No. It should really be the people who you're documenting. And I'm not just talking about virtue signaling. I'm talking about finding real ways in which what you make can really help the subject matter.
That was Mark Neville, reflecting on the Port Glasgow book project, which was a significant turning point in his photography career and the beginning of a socially engaged artistic practice. Since then, it has taken him from London to Afghanistan and eventually the Ukraine, where he has been based since 2020. We speak about the Postcode Ukraine charity that Mark founded as a way to combine documentary photography with humanitarian aid work, the Battle Against Stigma book project, which was born out of his personal experiences with PTSD, and his latest publication, Diary of a Volunteer, which focuses on mental health awareness. Mark's story is incredibly inspiring and really captures the activist potential of art, photography, and in particular, photo books, to make a meaningful change in the world. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. You're listening to Subtext and Discourse Art World Podcast, highlighting unique perspectives on contemporary art and photography. I'm your host, Michael Dooney. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, or wherever you get your podcasts to catch the latest episodes. Now, without further ado, please enjoy my interview with Mark Neville. Let's just give some context to where you are at the moment, because you just wrote to me on Instagram and said you've just returned from the front line. So where are you and what are you doing?
We're currently in Kharkiv region, East Ukraine. I'm working on a documentary. I'm just completing a photo book as well. And I've been living in Ukraine actually for 5 years, Michael. So Kharkiv is only a 5-6 hour drive from Kiev, where I've been living for those 5 years. We actually got back from the front line yesterday night, actually. We went to a place called Krasnopilya, which is a small village in Sumy region. And Sumy borders Belarus, and it's one of the expected points of the next invasion from Russia.
Wow.
So basically I set up a charity here in Ukraine 3 years ago, just after the war started, called Postcode Ukraine. And I combine humanitarian aid deliveries to frontline towns with my own forms of documentary practice, films and photography and bookmaking. We also support other grassroots charities. So we give small grants to people like Animal Rescue Kharkiv. And it was Animal Rescue Kharkiv I was with yesterday. And what they do, it's amazing. They evacuate animals. So basically they go into towns which are being heavily shelled, and they either rescue dogs and cats that have been left by their owners who had to leave immediately when the shelling escalated, or they go and collect dogs and cats from their owners whilst the owners are still there, because the owners felt that they couldn't leave their premises without finding accommodation for their animals. So I went out with them yesterday and we knew it was going to be dangerous. And of course, we heard shelling from both sides. So Russia shelling Ukraine and Ukraine returning that shelling. But also what was really frightening was we heard drones above us, and we knew they were Russian drones, and you can't see anything, but you hear them.
Yeah.
And you've probably seen these videos of drones dropping bombs on people. And so that immediately goes through your mind, and you try and find somewhere where you can't be seen from above. Yeah. So that was yesterday, and we got back very late. So I needed to go back to Kiev basically to recover for a couple of days before returning to Kharkiv. So that's what we're doing now.
Wow. Could you ever have anticipated that this would be your day-to-day as an artist and a photographer?
I didn't seek it out, actually, Michael, no. So I've been making socially engaged projects, I guess you would call them, or even activist, although that's a bit of a dirty word these days. It's accurate in terms of what I make, and has been for the past 20 years. So I've really been fascinated by the ethical side of photography, and it's not that I think I'm better or worse than anybody else. I'm just fascinated by the ethics behind photographic representation. So, my first project in terms of that context, the genesis of my mature practice as an adult was probably the Port Glasgow book project, which I made just over 20 years ago, where I won a kind of public art competition to make a piece of art on the west coast of Scotland. So I proposed a book of social documentary images of the town of Port Glasgow, the small, very working class shipbuilding community on the west coast. And every single house in the whole of the port would get a free copy of the book that I'd made, during the residency. So the idea was it was a kind of critique of the way in which these glossy Magnum style hardback books, photo documentary books, always end up on the coffee tables of white middle class people and not on the coffee tables of the people actually represented in the book itself. So I spent a year in Port Glasgow in 2002, I think it was, and I got deep into the community and lived my life there effectively for over a year. And at the end of it, made this photo book, and it was hand delivered by the local boys football team to each of the 8,000 homes in Port Glasgow. So we did an edition of 8,000, and it was targeted only to the people in Port Glasgow. So in other words, the book was never commercially available. You couldn't buy it in the shops. You couldn't order it on Amazon. And I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the whole process of being embedded in a community that wasn't my natural home, if you like, and seeing what would happen. And again, prior to that, I'd been doing exhibitions in art galleries to a certain extent, but not really succeeding very much in it, but trying anyway. And it was just wonderful to make a piece of public artwork, because you can't really predict how people will respond to it. And if you do an exhibition in a well-known gallery or museum, you can pretty much predict who the audience is going to be, how they will respond, what kind of language will be used to describe what you've made, and the impact it will have. With public art, you can never predict that, and that's very exciting. And, lots of things happened with that book. One was that all the Protestant residents in one particular street in Port Glasgow got together and had a book burning. And they got together, they took their copies of the book and they dumped them at the back of a Catholic club because they thought there were too many pictures taken in Catholic pubs and clubs and churches and not enough pictures taken in Protestant pubs and churches. So the fire brigade called me and said, "Your books are on fire, Mr. Neville." So I went to have a look, and I was very upset at the time, but actually, retrospectively, it was something that caught people's imagination, and it was really fascinating to see how public art and photo books can be a kind of gauge of how, sectarian values and other types of stresses and strains within a community can operate. And I went through the book afterwards, and I think there was 7 or 8 pictures in Protestant pubs and clubs and churches and 9 taken in Catholic pubs and clubs and churches. So that slight imbalance is enough to cause a book burning.
Wow.
And, the other thing that happened with that kind of the genesis of my work now was that those books started to become very valuable. So in terms of, unit price, if you want to think, the whole budget for the whole project was like £100,000 or something, a lot of money. But if you break it down for 8,000 books, it turns out to be £12 a copy, everything, the printing, the filming, the photography, everything, all the expenses, £12 a copy. And the books, much to my amazement, started to become very popular and very valuable. People in the art world, so I'd say, "Oh, I want a copy of the Port Glasgow book." And I'd say, "Sorry, you can't have a copy. It's not for you." And then copies of the book started to sell on eBay for up to like $500 or $600 a copy.
Wow.
And then the people in Port Glasgow who had burnt their copies of the book got even more angry because they said, first you insult us by getting the sectarian balance wrong, and then you trick us out of money,
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't really that bad, but I mean, those negative responses are sometimes more interesting than the positive ones. And I did have lots of positive responses to the book as well. But the funny thing was, having tried for 10 years to kind of break into the art world, whatever that means, I don't think anyone really knows what it means, but not really having any way forward. As soon as I did a project which wasn't at all for the art world, which was totally about talking to the subject matter of my photographs, as opposed to any other demographic. As soon as I did that, then people in the art world went, "Oh, that's interesting." It's this thing about human nature, isn't it? If you deny someone something, they kind of want it.
Yeah.
So, that led to me being offered possibilities to progress my work, my practice, my way of working. And I started to get offers for exhibitions at Modern Art Oxford, and then Andy Warhol Museum in America commissioned me to do a big project in Pittsburgh for them. And so it kind of led the way for me to make these kind of projects where I really tried to think about the relationship between the audience and the artwork. Like who is really going to benefit from me taking photographs? Is it the New York Times? No. Is it a gallery? No. It should really be the people who you're documenting. And I'm not just talking about virtue signaling. I'm talking about finding real ways in which what you make can really help the subject matter.
Yeah, I noticed that when I was looking into the history of some of your different projects and how even opting to use the football club to distribute the books rather than getting the post office to do it, because then the money went back directly to that organization. I mean, that's really creative thinking, but really you're doing the work for the people that you're photographing. And I think somehow that's really rare, which is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. So, I think I budgeted £14,000 for the delivery of the photo books to every single home in the whole of Port Glasgow. And that was the Royal Mail quote, the British postage system. And actually, midway through the project, I had a conversation with the manager of the football team, the boys' football team, said, well, actually, if you can deliver the books, you can get the money. And I had to fight for the people holding the purse strings to agree to it. Initially, they were like, oh, yeah, if the kids are going to get injured, or what happens if one of the kids gets bitten by a dog delivering the book? And I was like, well, they're much less likely to get attacked when they're delivering books to their friends, their uncles, their aunties, than a team of outside postmen,
Yeah, exactly.
Within their community. And then finally they acquiesced and I was able to give them the money. But to this day, I would say it's probably one top 5 best days of my life was seeing all these swarms of kids chapping on doors of council estates, saying, here's your free book about Port Glasgow. And just that whole interaction was magical.
Yeah. What was the change point for you then? If you said you were plugging away in the art world for 10 years and not really getting anywhere, and then deciding I'm going to go in the opposite direction, which ironically brought the art world then to you.
Yeah, and also it made me made me think less about ambition and more about what I was actually making. I mean, I guess I was like in my early 30s then, and it's a common mistake to make that, when you're younger, you want to be ambitious for yourself. And as you get older, you want the work to be ambitious and the work to, there is a difference. And I think it was a kind of turning point there that I didn't expect any easy ways to success,
Yeah.
And you can work very hard as an artist all your life and have no career, but you have to be making, to have a chance at having a career. If you don't make anything, there's no chance you'll have the career. So in a way, the practice has to come first. And although it's different from working in a studio, painting or something, you've still got to manifest what your ideas are in some way.
Yeah. So following on, I guess we can say the success of the Port Glasgow Book Project, how did that change your approach moving forward?
I realised I'd tapped into something and that I had this ability to work in different communities for extended periods of time. And I mean, lots of people can't or just don't want to do that, because it means being away from home. It means being quite vulnerable in lots of ways. It means approaching strangers a lot. Journalists do this, of course, and I couldn't be a journalist and I wouldn't want to be one. I don't think I'm better or worse than a journalist. It's just, it is different, because journalists tend to go in and out very quickly and have a very big knowledge about lots of different things. Whereas, I'm more like I want to stay in the community and really understand how my work can actually benefit in real tangible ways, as opposed to just reporting on events. And I find that a lot now in Ukraine, that you see a lot of photographers here making really stunning images, but it's all to do with generating fear or catering for Western newspapers, so it's always the most shocking image or the crying grandmother in front of a burning building or whatever it might be, that is considered good photography, whereas I'm much more likely to try and just do a very gentle portrait of someone and there might be no indications of war whatsoever in the image, So,
yeah.
And also because I live here, this is my home, Ukraine. So it's been the one time in my life, I would say, that the work and my art have completely crossed over and meshed. Because when the war escalated in 2022, I was in my apartment with my partner, Ukriane, who's Ukrainian, and we thought, what the hell are we going to do,
Yeah.
Do we stay? Do we leave? Do I pick up a gun? Do I just report on what's happening to the West as best I can? Do I go out and take pictures? Just prior to that, Michael, I'd done another book called Stop Tanks with Books, which I'd spent 7 years making about Ukraine. And I just delivered it again for free. So this concept of target audiences getting a book for free still somehow remained important to me. I spent 7 years leading up to the outbreak of the full-blown invasion 3 years ago. I spent 7 years either living in Ukraine or coming back and forth from London to Ukraine to do projects here. I did a big project about displaced people here. I did a couple of shoots of the New York Times. I did whenever I had a chance, I'd come back to Ukraine. And I finally moved here in 2020. And, I decided to make this book, Stop Tanks. And the idea was that the West was completely ignoring Ukraine. All the reports we were getting in newspapers about Ukrainians were they were paedophiles or Nazis or, it was all Kremlin propaganda. And because very few journalists actually went out to Ukraine and had a look and experienced it for themselves, these lies, these Kremlin propaganda lies were really perpetuated by a lot of even, high-end British newspapers were perpetuating these myths coming out of the Kremlin. And also it really wasn't in the West's interest to investigate further because we had so many and do still have very strong financial ties with Russia. So for lots of reasons, I got really upset about this kind of dehumanization of Ukrainians and the lack of support for Ukraine, because actually the war started in 2014 and the support from the West was kind of very small and sporadic. And one could feel as someone living in Ukraine, even as a British guy living in Ukraine, one could feel that a full-blown invasion was about to happen.
Gosh.
So I spent these years making photographs all over the country. I included different types of documentary information, such as short stories from an amazing Ukrainian writer called Luba Yakimchuk. I included kind of ethnographic, anthropological research from Oxford University about the political beliefs and other beliefs from people living in Donbass in the east. I included my own call to action, which is what I wanted for Ukraine, which is fast-track membership of the EU and of NATO. So this was things I was asking for in this book before 2022. And we printed the book in Istanbul and I sent it out to my target audience of 750 people, including media, the super rich, politicians, everyone I felt had it in their power somehow to help Ukraine in its fight for independence and against Russian aggression. And we got the books out literally like 2 weeks before the full-blown invasion happened. So end of January, beginning of February, we got the books out. And then I remember coming back with my partner to Kiev and then just waking up, to the sound of sirens, and the war had started. And I'd been so busy trying to get my book finished and out, warning people that the war's coming. I'd almost forgotten to warn myself, what the fuck are you going to do, because it's not like I had anywhere to go to. Not like having apartments in London or Paris or New York. I'd moved, in 20 I moved my life out of my studio and all my photographs, my negatives, my camera kit, my belongings, my furniture, everything to Kiev. So when that gets under threat, Michael, it really touches you very personally and brings out things in you that you don't really know you have until it's right on your doorstep.
Yeah, I don't think I could even fathom that, because we see all these things from far away, and even hearing about some of your earlier projects, which I'd like to go back to, but it's your home now. You live there. It's not like other photographers that are sort of, let's say, parachuting in is kind of the common term, making the work and then leaving. Like right now, you're in your car driving back to Kiev. You live in the Ukraine, and you were there when it started. Like that's such a different experience to let's say visiting a war zone. Like you've been in the sort of tense environment of it, building and building and building, and then now that's your daily life.
Yeah. Well, the thing was, when the war started, Ukriane, my partner, and I, she got incredibly stressed. I mean, everyone was stressed, but she said, get me out of here. So, what war does is it brings all your priorities into stark relief, and you have to say, right, this is the first thing, then the second thing, got to do this. and my number one priority was and is my partner. So she says, get me out. That's my responsibility to try and get her out of the country. So we went to West Ukraine, and with hundreds of thousands of other people, we walked across the border into Poland. We spent a week trying to get across the border. First, the trains were jammed, then they didn't work. Then you couldn't get across the border. Anyway, we got across into Poland. But I just felt like this burning desire to go back to Ukraine. Even after 1 week, it was like, no, I've got to go back and face this. I'm damned if I'm going to be pushed out of my home. This is my life. These are my friends here now. My partner's Ukrainian. Her parents are still in Ukraine. My colleagues are there. This is my home now. It's not Poland. It's not France. It's not UK. And I was really surprised that I had those very strong emotions about Ukraine. But I did, and this was a test of them. And then out of the blue, one of the collectors of my work, my photographs, who I'd sent a copy of Stop Tanks with Books to, he got in touch and said, how can I help? And I said, well, I don't think it's enough just to send me back to Ukraine to take photographs along with 10,000 other people from, all the world's media. I said, we need to really help people. And that means not just me documenting what's happening and trying to find ways in which that material can be seen in ways that break through compassion fatigue. It's not enough just to try and do that. We need to establish a charity too, so that when I go on trips to the front line, we can deliver food, medicine, sleeping bags, books, water, whatever people need. We also give grants to other charities that are doing really important work. But these are often very small charities like we are. But like we are, we're able to help really quickly. So we'll go to a frontline town and we'll identify what the needs are. And then we'll have a meeting about it afterwards, and we'll get those things to those people, and we'll do it quickly. The problem with these bigger aid agencies is that it's too slow. The whole mechanism is too bureaucratic. So to my amazement, this amazing altruistic family who had collected my work for years said, okay, we agree. So I founded Postcode Ukraine, this hybrid of humanitarian aid and forms of documentary practice, my own forms, like 2 months after the war started. And we've been going ever since. And I think we've delivered about nearly $500,000 worth of aid in that time. Wow. But it does involve me going regularly to the front line and working, But what it does is, which I was really interested in, was it changes my relationship to the subject matter. So I'm not just some guy turning up, taking pictures, disappearing again, and making money from selling those images to the or whatever,
Yeah.
I turn up, I bring aid, and it just totally changes the transaction that's going on. It's a pretty obvious idea, but so few people do it. So the concept behind the charity is really to see to what extent photography and contemporary art can be symbiotic with humanitarian aid. I mean, a lot of magnum photographers will tell you it's not possible to do both, but it is possible. Clearly it's possible. And I don't think it's enough just to take pictures. I just don't see that that's changing things at all. And what I hope to do, the ambition with the charity, is to reconfigure the role of the war photographer to a certain extent and, make people think about ways in which photography needs to have a role which is more than just virtue signaling, more than just being attached to whatever the cause of the day is,
Yeah, absolutely.
I just think, especially now, it's not enough. We've got to break through the bubble, basically. And everything we do has to have some real world impact. Otherwise, we're all going to hell in a handbasket very, very soon.
No, I mean, it's incredibly inspiring what you're doing, Mark. And I hope that you can inspire like a new generation of photojournalists and even artists that want to have a socially engaged practice to see that it is possible, actually. Like, you're one guy that's gone over there, and if your charity since 2022 has already raised $500,000 to actually help the people, not make a nice book so that people like myself can go to a gallery and go, oh, they're really struggling in Ukraine. Like, no, you've actually helped people out. It's so admirable. Like, it's amazing.
I mean, that's the aim. Yes, it's to really see what happens when all aspects of the art world, curators, collectors, come together, try and make something happen. That's the kind of common link, I would say, with all my other work, is it's really tried to do more than just pay lip service to an issue.
Yeah, because Ukraine isn't the first war zone you've been to. Like, you started out going to Afghanistan as a war artist, and like maybe that was the sort of start of it. But even then, well, maybe you can tell me about how that came about.
Well, I'd done, 2010, 2011, 6 or 7 years I'd been making these projects, sometimes using film, sometimes photography. They wouldn't always end up, as a book with a targeted delivery as an output. So I think I said I was commissioned by the Anti-War Museum to do a project. That was a slide installation, actually. It wasn't a book project. I was also commissioned by Mount Stewart on the Isle of Bute in Scotland to do a project. I was their artist in residence. That was a slide installation and a film, 60mm. But, a few times I've adopted this book delivery strategy. Then suddenly out of the blue, I think because I'd established this practice whereby I would work with quite a large community of people, normally a very strong working class community, be it in Port Glasgow or the farming community on the Isle of Bute. These were places I could operate within and feel comfortable and do something, hopefully, with some meaning or impact. So I kind of garnered a small reputation for this way of working. And I think that's what drew the Imperial War Museum to me, because, they had this thing where they commission war artists every few years and send them to a war zone, and they've been doing that since Paul Nash in 1914, and the war poets and so forth. So they approached me, called me for interview, and I had no interest at that time whatsoever of going to a war zone. And I didn't think they'd even choose me. But, I was flattered, and they interviewed a couple of Turner Prize winners. So, I was in good company. And to my amazement, they interviewed me and decided I wasn't medically or clinically insane, and I had enough, nous and self-care to go to a war zone. Also, the military had to interview me as well. And so they gave it to me. So I guess the word is embedded, but it was slightly different. I'm not a journalist at all. So I was embedded, for want of a better word, with 16 Air Assault Brigade, which is the paratroopers in Helmand, Afghanistan I went twice, once for 3 months, and then I went back for more punishment again very shortly after that. And I guess because my grandfather was captain of a ship during World War II, I was curious, to know what a war zone was really like. And I thought I could say something maybe different than other people have said about the war zone. I was that arrogant at the time that I thought I could really make a difference and tell the truth of what's happening in Afghanistan, or whatever you want to say about it. But so, yes, I went there and I came back with post-traumatic stress disorder, actually. And I decided that, I wanted something really good to come out of this horrible experience, apart from the films and photographs I made, which I think were quite good. So I decided to make a book called Battle Against Stigma, which was to try and fight the stigma associated with mental health issues in the military, because I found it very difficult to admit that I had problems after Afghanistan and come forward and seek professional help. And I thought, if I find it difficult, how much tougher must it be for a soldier who's been told to man up his entire life, since he was 16? So I thought, this is really an important subject. I'm going to make a book about it. So I put together all my good photographs from Helmand, Afghanistan, and then I interviewed people from the military who used to think PTSD was non-existent or bullshit, but they now know it exists and it's real, because either they've suffered from it or their friends suffered from it. And I interviewed veterans, current servicemen, and my idea was to combine these pictures that I'd taken in Helmand with these stories and try and reach veterans who were still suffering but hadn't the courage or the education or hadn't been encouraged to come forward and seek professional medical help. So that was my target audience for this project. And I went to the Ministry of Defence. I said, I've got a great idea for a book. It's not about criticising the British Army or the Ministry of Defence in any way. I'm only interested in helping people who are suffering from PTSD, but, don't know how or can't or think there's some stigma attached to coming forward and saying, I need help. And first off, they were very excited about it. And then they got very nervous and they said, we refuse for you to reproduce your pictures taken in Helmand, Afghanistan, with these stories from servicemen about their experiences of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And so I said, okay, I promise not to reproduce these in the same book. Yeah. And so what I did was I produced a slipcase with 2 volumes, one of my pictures and one of these stories, but bound in one slipcase, all made by this great printer in Barcelona. And so it was my fuck you to the Ministry of Defence. Like, I'm going to do it anyway. But they immediately fucked me back because the books were printed in Barcelona. They came over and 1,000 copies were seized at customs by Border Force, who, go figure, has strong connections to the Ministry of Defence. But luckily, another consignment of the books also came from Barcelona, but came via a different route and arrived safely in my studio. This was in 2015. And then I spent all summer furiously sending them out before I got a knock on the door again from whoever, to homeless centres, to prisons. I did a tour of prisons in Britain with the book. All the places, mental health charities, all the places that you end up if you're a veteran suffering from PTSD, because you end up, I mean, it's natural. You end up self-medicating, drinking yourself to sleep every night, having awful nightmares, and you just end up losing your family, your friends, your work. You get more and more angry, and you kind of fall through the cracks of society and end up homeless or jobless or whatever, you know. So I did everything I could to get these books out to people. But the most amazing thing, one of the most amazing things that happened was I also did an interview for the Independent newspaper online. I think it was May 2015. And within 10 minutes of that piece going online, where I talked about my own issues with PTSD coming back from Afghanistan, I talked about this book, which I was going to send out for free, or was sending out already for free. And at the end, I put, this is my email address. If you're a veteran or the son or mother or relation of a veteran who's suffering, don't hesitate, email me and I'll send you a free copy of the book, Battle Against Stigma. And as soon as that went live online, I got an email every 10 minutes or so for 3 months from veterans, relations of veterans from all over the world, but a lot of people who had served in Kosovo or Iraq or Afghanistan. And they weren't just saying, give me a copy of the free book. They were saying, going into incredible detail about what happened to them in this war zone and how impossible it was for them or for their partners to adjust to civilian life again. And time again, they said, I saw a version of myself in you when you wrote about your experiences. And then I realized again with that book that if you write or if you make a project which you have direct personal experience of and you're open about it, it's a very powerful way to communicate with people. And those projects have, apart from the first one, Port Glasgow one, which was a strange critique of the class system in a way in Britain, all the other projects, most of them I've had some kind of real personal connection to the issue or to the demographic. But those emails now I received represent a really strong archive about what it means to fight in modern war. And it's something invisible, you know. We're talking about invisible wounds that people don't talk about, that they're ashamed of, but they're really a big part of war. And actually that led me to Ukraine, funny enough, because I got an email from Kiev Military Hospital saying, we heard about your book about treating people with post-traumatic stress disorder coming back from war zones. And we've just had this war going on for a year now, which was 2014, the war in Ukraine started. So, you know, our war's been going on for a year and we're getting all these people, guys and women, coming back from the front line with terrible physical injuries, but also terrible psychological wounds as well. And can you send us a copy of your book? And I said, well, it's not in Ukrainian language, I'm afraid, but I had it translated into Ukrainian. I sent them a PDF. But I was so impressed that a post-Soviet country, in inverted commas, would be so forward-thinking and wanting to treat PTSD when my own country had effectively tried to ban the book.
Yeah, they'd censored you.
Yeah, they censored me, didn't they, Michael? So I was so impressed that had happened that I thought, I'm really fascinated by this country, Ukraine. I'm going to go and visit. So in 2015, I went to Ukraine for the very first time. I visited the military hospital in Kiev and fell in love with the country, the people, food, the architecture, the culture. And that, you know, that started me on this path that I've been on since then, I guess.
Yeah, wow. So then later this year, you've got Diary of a Volunteer coming out. Is that right?
Yeah, so basically over the past 3 years, I've been documenting the process of delivering aid, either with my own charity, Postcode Ukraine, or accompanying other charities that we support, such as Volunteer 68, who are in Kharkiv. And I've been on evacuations with them, also with Animal Rescue Kharkiv, who I recently went on a visit to Sumy region with, where we nearly got attacked by Russian drones. So this diary I've made is basically about those experiences. I think there's about 100 new photographs in there and short stories about what happened, really. And the focus has been, in this book, mental health support again.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because what we really need in Ukraine, actually, is weapons, okay? That's what we need in order to win this war. But as the director, or the co-director of a humanitarian aid charity, I'm not allowed to say that. So, but if I wasn't, that's what I would say. But I think second on my list would be functioning, highly professional, ubiquitous mental health support for people here, because everyone I know is utterly mentally broken now, myself included. But everyone I know is either on antidepressants or feeling absolutely awful. The stress of being at war for so long is through the roof. You know, I've been to many funerals. All my friends have been to countless funerals. So many people I've photographed in Diary of a Volunteer have been killed. These are friends, you know, and things got really bad last year with mobilization. So everyone between the ages of 25 and 59 now has to report to the military. So you can imagine the whole country is traumatized. There's no another way of putting it. But as you can imagine, Ukraine doesn't have a great history of mental health support because it was under the Soviet system, whereby Stalin used to use psychiatry and mental health issues as a way to imprison his political enemies. So psychological support was a byword for beware, because we're going to lock you up. So people were taught not to show emotional weakness, and that's got to change. And it is changing. And Ukraine's come an enormous way in 30 years since its independence. But I think that's so important that we try and offer mental health support, not just for veterans returning from the front line, but also for the families who are left behind. So lots of mothers looking after their kids. You know, you imagine the worry and the fear that's going through people's minds when their husbands are away at the front line. I mean, even within our organisation, you know, there's only 4 of us here. There's me, there's a charity liaison manager who's Ukrainian called Yulia, who's tremendous. We have an accountant for the charity as well, for Postcode Ukraine. And, you know, I'm working with a fantastic driver called Max at the moment. So Max's story, for example, he was in the military for 10 years. He met his wife there. They got married and they were running a mortar unit, a small unit of mortar bomb operators.
Yeah.
And they were planning on what they were going to do when they left the army. They planned to leave the army last year, and they were talking in April, and his wife got killed basically just before they were due to hit by a Russian missile. And so Max, he's a young guy in his early 30s. He was just absolutely, still is, it's less than a year, absolutely devastated. But what his wife wanted to do was set up an animal sanctuary, because they'd already been, well, whilst fighting, they were kind of also rescuing animals and taking them back to clinics. So in order to follow through with his wife's wishes, he decided to work with Animal Rescue Kharkiv, and he embarks on these highly dangerous evacuations of animals now to the front line. That's one person in my charity. The accountant, a wonderful woman called Valerie, she's in her 40s. Her husband, no experience in the military. They mobilized him, sent him to train for a few weeks, and then immediately sent him to Pokrovsk, which is really the front line in the east. And he was injured within 2 days, nearly killed, came back to Kiev and has had operations ever since. He's going to be okay. But, you know, it impacts everyone is what I'm trying to say. Even me, the government sends me text messages saying, you should report for military service. I mean, they've made a mistake. I'm not obliged to because I'm British, but, you know, they're trying, they want everyone to go, you see.
Wow.
So the new book, Diary of a Volunteer, it's been sent out for free, 1,000 copies to mental health organizations in America and the West and Europe, saying, please get in touch with these people. And we've listed the mental health system and organizations as it is in Ukraine, saying, please help these organizations because, it's just a disaster. It's just too much for people to cope with. So we're sending it out to mental health organizations all over the world. We're sending it out also to politicians, think tanks, because the book is also, I would say, it's calling for support for Ukrainian people, okay? So at the moment, a lot of people here feel like, rightly so, they don't have a voice. So they feel kind of caught between what America thinks and what Russia says, and somehow in that equation, what normal Ukrainians want and need and deserve is not being figured into the equation at all, and it's not being vocalized or verbalized or made visible on any of the chat shows or political programs I see and watch. They very rarely bring Ukrainians into the discussion or even come here and ask Ukrainians what they think and what they feel and what they want for their future. So as well as calling for mental health support, we're also calling to create a kind of circle of people who feel like they want to support Ukraine in some way going forward. And it might not necessarily mean financial support. It might mean support by giving one's name to this group of people we're setting up. I want to say patrons, but it's not really patrons. It's like a circle of people we're trying to create to make sure that Ukrainians, normal, average, everyday Ukrainians have a voice going forward, no matter what the context is in the future, no matter if Russia overruns Ukraine or whatever happens. Primarily, it's their voice that counts, not America's, not Europe's, and certainly not Russia's. So we've just gone to print on that, and we'll be sending it out in about 2 weeks' time.
Wow, okay. So I guess the books will be in circulation by the time people listen to this. But if people are inspired and this resonates with them, which I hope that it will, how can they best support the kind of work that you're doing?
Well, just visit our website, postcodeukraine.com, and you can read about the development, the news with the book. You can join our newsletter. We have a donations page as well, though that's not necessarily the most important thing. I think just getting in touch with us, making sure that we know who you are and what you're doing and, how you can contribute in the future, maybe, So just communication would be wonderful. I think so many people here in Ukraine feel alone, isolated. I wouldn't say we feel betrayed by the West, because I don't think that's the right word, but I do think if the West had acted quicker, more forcefully in 2022, we wouldn't be in this situation now. And what makes me really sad as well is I think that by not acting decisively enough, the West has actually dug its own grave. People saw that a genocide was happening and is still happening in Ukraine, and they tolerated it. And I'll go as far as to say as that caused other genocides to happen as a result and led to the situation we're in now, because actually it's much easier with a dictator like Putin. You have to stand up to him as quickly and as firmly as possible. And the longer you leave it, the tougher it becomes actually to face the threat. And now we see, the situation as it is now. But yes, please, if anyone feels that any of this resonates with them, please get in touch through our website, postcodeukraine.com, and we can send you a newsletter. We can keep you updated. We can have a conversation about how you might contribute. We can have a conversation about mental health support. We can have a conversation about donations. We can have a conversation about art, anything you like. The bigger we can grow this group, the better. Michael, thank you so much for talking to me today. It's really kind of you to give me this platform.
No, thank you, Mark. I think you're the real deal. People think I'm making a difference with my photography. You're changing lives and making the world a better place. So really, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Michael.
Thanks, Mark, for sharing your important work on the podcast, and thank you for listening. There are links to Postcode Ukraine and Mark's website and social media presence included in the show notes. If you don't want to miss out on new episodes, please subscribe to Subtext and Discourse Art World Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you know someone else interested in the overlap of photography and the art world, please send them a link to the show. You're welcome to follow me on Instagram, LinkedIn, Blue Sky, and Threads. Otherwise, you can also use the contact form on my website, www.michaeldooney.net. There you'll also find the International Photography Festival database I put together, as well as my webinar for photographers and artists working in lens-based media to better understand the art market and get their work into galleries. That's all for now. Thanks again for tuning in. My name's Michael Dooney, and you've been listening to Subtext and Discourse.